They thought the desert was empty. They were wrong. Beneath centuries of shifting sands lies a city lost not just to time, but to memory itself. Three explorers follow a forgotten map into the heart of Kal-Shahar, where the laws of history, reality, and time no longer apply. What they find there isn't a ruin, but a question. Who built it? Why was it buried? And what is it guarding still? Prepare for a journey where myth meets quantum mystery, where every answer demands a sacrifice. This is not just a story, it's a reckoning. And once you hear it, you'll never see our world the same again. If the desert gives you something, be sure it wants something back. That's what the Tuaregs say. It was a whisper of a phrase spoken on the final night before departure. No one took it seriously. No one, except perhaps Dr. Isaac Raleigh, the last true cartographer of his kind. The kind that didn't just read maps. He listened to them, and he was listening now. The year was 2022, and the Sahara was hotter than ever. Satellite data had become almost routine another day. Another 1,000 square miles of sand captured in hyper-precise resolution. But this time, something emerged. Structure just barely visible beneath the dunes west of the Gilf Kibber Plateau. A shape people thought to be natural. Octagonal, ancient, hidden for longer than history has memory. Isaac didn't trust digital scans. He trusted Turan, the smell of sunburnt rock, the crunch of old sand beneath the boot, the rhythm of stars that only the old world still remembered. He had been mapping forgotten trade routes and ceremonial paths for nearly 3 decades, driven by the fragments of stories no one else believed. He called them cartographic ghosts, footprints not found in any database, only hinted at in inconsistent tribal lore, half-raced papyri, and shattered tablets. The stories all shared one common detail: a city that could not be found by walking toward it, only if the desert allowed. That city had many names, but the Bedouin called it Kal-Shahar, the silence below. By early May, Raleigh had assembled a 4-person team under the guise of topographic anomaly research. No university was involved, no museum, no press. Just quiet funding from a forgotten grant out of Austria and one oil company that probably did unread the fine print. Lena Falk, geophysicist and former military engineer, fascinated by seismic voids beneath desert floors. Dr. Hakim Becerra, expert in North African petroglyphs and oral history. Elijah Voss, young documentary filmmaker, brought along to record history. He thought this would be a Netflix pitch. And Raleigh, the ghost seeker. They departed from Suwa in 3 battered vehicles, driving southeast into the dunes until the GPS grew confused and then went silent entirely. The desert doesn't like witnesses. By day 4, Elijah had stopped talking. On day 6, Lena's instruments began to show strange electromagnetic fluctuations, not random, but rhythmic, like a hidden pulse beneath the sand. "It's not natural," she muttered. "It's like the ground is breathing." The sand changed color before they saw it. Redder, heavier. Becerra recognized it first crushed pigment mixed with bone dust used in ceremonial markers. Then came the stones, laid out in perfect intervals, forming a path that seemed to vanish at either end. But only if you looked directly. If you looked slightly away, the path was clear as day. It led them to what appeared to be a simple depression in the sand, until Lena stumbled and vanished from view. When they reached her, she was standing in a vast hollow beneath a collapsed dome, covered in glyphs neither she nor Becerra had ever seen. The air was cool. The wind did not enter. The symbols told no story, not at first glance. But Becerra whispered a phrase he hadn't used in years. "This is pre-memory." They camped at the rim of the depression, avoiding eye contact with the structure's entrance, a narrow slit in the rock, wide enough for a single body, flanked by stone pillars carved with layered rings, each ring cut deeper than the last. Becerra insisted they wait until dawn to enter, But Raleigh went in that night. He returned 4 hours later, carrying something wrapped in linen that hadn't existed in any of their supplies. He said nothing. Only locked it inside a weatherproof case and marked it with a simple symbol. Elijah caught the moment on camera, but the footage was gone by morning. Not corrupted, erased. "I didn't delete it," he swore. No one believed him. Except Lena, whose devices now refused to work within 50 meters of the hollow. At noon the next day, Raleigh unfurled one of his ancient hand-drawn maps, weathered by decades of sun and sweat. He began marking coordinates, but not from satellite or survey. From memory, Becerra objected. "This doesn't align with any known topography." Raleigh only smiled. "It doesn't have to. Kal-Shahar isn't in the desert. The desert is in it." Then something impossible happened. The paper began to darken, not stain but, as though something beneath the surface was writing from the inside. A new path, a new perimeter. Lena's instruments flatlined, and in the distance, the wind began to howl, not with sound, but with voices. Dozens, hundreds, calling names. One of them was Raleigh's. That night, as the moon rose blood-ringed over the dunes, the team sat in a reluctant silence. Raleigh's map now showed a formation none of them could explain: concentric corridors leading into the hollow like a labyrinth. "Maybe it's a temple," Elijah offered, still shaken. "No," Lena said flatly. "It's a filter." "A filter for what?" "Not for what. For who?" Becerra pulled a fragment of stone from his bag. He had chipped it from the inner wall before they exited. At first glance, it was ordinary limestone, but under UV light, something shimmered, a microscopic matrix of crystalline lines, too precise to be natural, too ancient to be modern. "It's a signal amplifier," Becerra said. "Not to send something out, but to keep something in." Raleigh remained silent, eyes fixed on the linen-wrapped object in his case. On the 7th day, they descended. The passage was unnaturally smooth. No sand, no moisture. Just the subtle hum of pressure against the ears, like being underwater in a cathedral. The walls bore no writing-only recessed notches, each identical in size and form. Some emitted warmth when passed. Others produced faint tones, like a tuning fork struck in your spine. Then came the Chamber of Echoes. It was vast, circular, with no visible ceiling. When Lena whispered hello, the sound didn't return to them. Instead, it responded in a different voice, mail.com. In ancient Greek, no mortal may enter the city until the sun forgets its name. They fled. Except Raleigh. He stayed behind for 22 minutes, the precise number Lena recorded on her analog wristwatch, the only device still ticking. When he emerged, his eyes were unfocused. He muttered something that Becerra translated slowly. "It remembers us." That evening, Elijah announced he was done. This isn't science. This isn't archaeology. This is a F*******ing trap. He left before dawn, heading back toward the vehicles. They found his camera 2 days later, partially buried near a black obelisk none of them had seen before. His footsteps stopped there. No sign of struggle, no sign of wind, just absence. Lena looked at Raleigh. "We should leave." But Raleigh didn't move. Instead, he finally unwrapped the linen artifact, a map not drawn, but carved into what looked like volcanic glass. Not with coordinates, but with moments. "It's not a map of land," he said. "It's a map of time, events, wounds." "And where does it lead?" Becerra asked. Raleigh looked up at the blazing sun. "To a city that doesn't want to be remembered, but still waits." On the 10th day, the depression vanished. Not pillars, not cover. No trace of the chamber. No markings in the sand. It's just 3 people and a question that grew heavier with each hour. They returned to Siwa in silence. The footage Elijah shot before his disappearance never played again. His voice would play, but the video remained black. Weeks later, Basara discovered that the glyphs inside the chamber matched those found in a monastery wall in northern Greece, dated 1st century BCE. The symbols hadn't been translated, but they now had a name, the language of the rememberers, and the linen that had wrapped the black glass. Carbon dated to 12,300 years old. Author: the desert wind had stripped away all sense of time. Days bled into nights. Meals became rituals of sharing stories around a dying fire. Sleep offered little respite from the oppressive heat or the dreams that seeped into the waking world. Raleigh had seen them first, faces that haunted the edges of his vision. Then Basara started seeing them too. Pale, emaciated figures that moved with a disconcerting grace. They seemed to glide just beyond the periphery, always there, yet never quite in frame. Their eyes, when he dared to look, burned with an eerie luminescence. When he woke in the morning, he rushed to the fire, hoping the flames would banish the specters haunting his sleep. But even then, he could feel their presence, colder than the desert night, clinging to the edge of his awareness. Once, Lena caught his gaze locked on one of the figures. "Do you see them too?" she mouthed, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. He nodded, unable to tear his eyes away. Basara sat cross-legged, eyes closed, a faint smile playing on his lips. He didn't seem to notice them at all. "Basara, are you all right?" Raleigh asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. The older man opened his eyes, a strange light shining within them. "I am remembering," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "We all are." Raleigh backed away, confused and frightened. Was this the legacy of the site, to drive men mad? But Basara only smiled wider, if that was possible, and continued staring into the flames. Days passed. They rationed their food, their water, their hope. One evening, Basara stopped eating. When Lena asked him why, he only shook his head, his eyes distant. "It doesn't matter," he said softly. It never did. Raleigh tried to persuade him to eat, but Basara wouldn't. He simply stared into the fire, muttering in a language they couldn't understand, yet somehow felt in their bones. The next morning, he was gone. When they found him, he was kneeling at the edge of the plateau, arms outstretched as if embracing the horizon. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the endless blue. Beside him was a single white feather, unlike any bird that lived in this harsh land. Raleigh and Lena looked at each other, understanding dawning in their eyes. They knew what they had to do. They had only been here for 6 days, but the sense of linear time had already begun to unravel. In the mornings, the sun cast shadows that never matched the objects. In the evenings, stars appeared that should not have been visible from that hemisphere. Raleigh noticed at first not with instruments, but in his dreams. He began seeing shapes that were too ancient to be remembered and too perfect to be man-made. He stopped talking about them. Basara kept a journal, each entry shorter than the last. On the 5th day, his handwriting changed, slanting in a way it never had. When Lena asked about it, he said nothing and buried the page in the fire. By the 6th night, the heat of the day no longer dissipated after sunset. The plateau remained warm, unnaturally so, and there was a low hum that lingered just below the threshold of hearing, the kind of frequency that made your skull vibrate. Lena thought it was a generator malfunctioning, but there was no generator. Raleigh stood up in the middle of the night and began walking. He said nothing, carried no light. The others followed instinctively, as if pulled by the same invisible thread. Northward, toward the crescent-shaped ridge. As they passed over it, the stones shifted beneath their boots, not crumbling, but receding as if the earth itself was opening an eyelid. They found the spiral descent without speaking. The entrance was carved with the same smoothness as the previous chamber. But this time, the walls were darker, more like obsidian than sandstone. The spiral wound downward in perfect geometry, narrowing just enough with each rotation to make them question their own proportions. Lena felt taller on the 3rd turn, shorter on the 5th. The air shimmered, not with heat, but with presence. a pressure that ebbed and returned like a tide. Each step into the depths felt like a choice they would not be able to reverse. At the base, they came to what appeared to be a doorway. No hinges, no seams. Just air that trembled as if trying to hold itself together. When Raleigh reached out, the vibration parted, folding inward with a sigh. They passed through into silence. A silence not empty, but dense. A vacuum of sound that made their own breathing feel intrusive. The room they entered was not a chamber, but a corridor endless in both directions, with no visible floor or ceiling. Only the walls, lined with shallow alcoves, each one housing a figure. Statues, perhaps, but Lena was sure they were not carved. She leaned close to one. Its eyes were closed, hands folded across its chest, skin pale and translucent. A crown of thorns not made of wood, but some organic crystal. She blinked. Its eyes were open. Raleigh whispered, "They're sleeping." "No," Basara said, voice cracking. "They're remembering." As they continued, the figures began to shift in appearance. Less human, more ... schematic, as if consciousness had been drawn out and encoded into geometry. Symbols floated in the alcoves, suspended in invisible planes. Raleigh tried to photograph one. His lens cracked instantly. Then a sound. Not from the corridor, from beneath. A rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat amplified through stone. With each beat, the walls shimmered. The corridor began to breathe. Lena clutched her pendant, not for safety, but to anchor herself to the concept of shape. They turned left, though there was no marker, and came into a spherical chamber. At its center was a monolith of black glass, 12 sides. No seams, floating above a disk of metal etched with what looked like a lunar calendar, except none of the moons belonged to Earth. Raleigh stepped forward. The monolith responded. A soft light pulsed from within, revealing scenes not moving images, but living memories. Cities swallowed by water. Mountain ranges split like parchment, a tower stretching skyward beyond the clouds, then falling backward into flame, and a symbol. An eye with no pupil, surrounded by rings of fire. Halim whispered, "This is not a map. It's a wound. A scar written in architecture." Then, one final vision. It's a temple itself, rising beneath a yellow sky, neither desert nor earth, and standing before it, a man with Raleigh's face, weathered, ancient. The vision collapsed. The chamber grew cold. They were no longer underground. When they stepped outside, they saw a desert that did not belong to this world. The sky had 3 moons. The sun was crimson. The crescent ridge was gone. Basara checked his compass. Lena lifted her camera. Nothing turned on. Raleigh stood still. "We've crossed it." "Crossed what?" Lena asked. He didn't answer, only looked skyward. The wind returned, but it whispered names they did not know. Names that sounded almost familiar. And in the distance, something large moved beneath the sand, leaving a trail of light. They were not alone, and whatever they had entered had no interest in letting them return. The desert before them was not barren. It breathed. They didn't speak for what felt like hours, though the pale shadows from the 3 moons shifted ever so slightly across the sand. Nothing in the distance seemed fixed. Even the mountains far beyond the horizon blinked in and out of focus like mirages deciding whether they were real. Raleigh moved first, kneeling to scoop a handful of sand. It flowed through his fingers with the texture of ash. Beneath the surface, barely visible metallic filaments shimmered like veins. They pulsed when touched, almost recoiling from his skin. Basara circled the area, eyes darting from landmark to landmark, making quick sketches in his notepad. But every time he looked down and back again, the geography had shifted. A dune gone. A ridge moved. He tore out the page. Lena stood at the perimeter of what once was the ridge. She watched the sky more than the land. The 3rd moon, furthest, was moving faster than the others. orbiting them. That was when the wind returned. But it wasn't natural. It blew not across the land, but around them like a boundary forming. Within it, the air remained still. Outside, the dunes reshaped. Something was defining space. A sound followed. Low, tectonic, like a mountain exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. And from beneath the sand, something rose. Not a structure, not a machine. A face. Massive, etched in stone and metal. Its features bore no single culture. Not Sumerian, not Egyptian, not Olmec. And yet, somehow, all of them. The eyes were closed, lips parted slightly, as if whispering to someone buried beneath time. Basara fell to his knees. "I've seen this before," he said. "In a temple in Elam, engraved into a bowl of solid mercury. It was called the Witness of Civilizations." Lena walked closer. "Is it alive?" Raleigh didn't answer. He was tracing something in the sand with his boot. A simple one he hadn't drawn, but felt compelled to copy. A spiral within a triangle, surrounded by 7 dots. It wasn't from any known system, but the face reacted. Its eyes opened. There were no pupils, only depth. Staring into them felt like falling. Raleigh tried to look away, but found he couldn't. Not out of fear, but recognition. It was as if the face knew him. Not just his name, but everything behind it. His ancestry, his unspoken doubts. His dreams from childhood that never made sense until now. Then came the voice. It did not speak through sound, but sensation. "You have crossed time's edge. You do not belong, yet you are permitted." The others heard it too, but each in their own language, in their own memories. For Lena, it was her mother's lullaby. For Basara, it was the Quranic verse his grandfather whispered as he died. For Raleigh, it was a whisper from a fire long extinguished. The ground cracked open in a perfect line. Beneath the face, a passage descended not downward, but sideways, through a corridor of impossibly shaped angles. It did not make sense visually, but it called to them nonetheless. They entered without debate. Inside, time ceased to function. Their watches slowed, then stopped. Lena's camera displayed a date, February 31st, year 0. The walls were covered in organic circuitry, living veins of light that pulsed as they walked, like the corridor itself was registering their presence. With each step, the air grew thicker, not in mass, but in memory, as if they were wading through the accumulated echoes of centuries. They came to a chamber that looked like an ancient observatory, except the stars it displayed were unrecognizable, constellations that formed and broke apart within seconds. Some twisted into symbols. One, unmistakably, was Earth, but not as it was. The countenance were wrong, shifted, flooded, fragmented. Basara whispered, "This is not the past. This is a possible future." Raleigh walked to the center of the chamber, where a pedestal rose from the floor. Upon it sat an orb, black and silent. When he touched it, everything froze, and then he saw the city. Not buried, but erased. Removed from time by something not malevolent, but protective. Kal-Shahar had not been destroyed, had hidden itself again and again from civilizations who got too close. It had revealed just enough to tempt them, to test them. Most failed. A few passed. None returned unchanged. He saw Lena, older, standing before an excavation with crowds behind her. He saw Basara alone in a library, hands trembling as he wrote the name of a god no language could pronounce. He saw himself, staring not at the city, but at its shadow cast across the sky with 2 suns. Then it ended. The orb darkened. The chamber cracked. Something was waking, while the walls began to pulse more rapidly. Light bled from every seam. Symbols burned themselves into the air and began rotating. The temperature dropped. Halim's voice echoed in Raleigh's mind, though he was not there. "Do not stay when the geometry changes, Aren." As they crossed the corridor again, the angles reshaped around them, threatening to trap them in configurations that defied Euclidean space. Lena screamed as her reflection fractured across 90 perspectives. Basara lost his footing and almost vanished into a wall that became liquid, then solid again. They emerged barely into the desert once more. But it was different. The moons were gone. The sun had not yet risen, and the face was now collapsed, melted into a crater of smoldering glass. Raleigh didn't speak. He knelt again, touching the sand. This time it was cold. They had returned, but the sky wasn't right. And the wind carried voices familiar, but wrong. Their return had not been a return. They quickly realized that the world into which they had emerged bore the fingerprints of their own, yet it wasn't theirs. The constellations had shifted ever so slightly. Ryan's belt was misaligned. Polaris flickered red. The air, though breathable, was thicker, holding a metallic temps as if iron hung invisible in every breath. What unsettled them most was the silence. The wind did not speak as it once had. No birds cried from the sky. The sands, though golden as before, no longer shifted naturally. They rippled slightly. Though breathing, Lena broke the stillness. What if, ... we never came back? Basara nodded slowly, brushing a palm across a nearby boulder. It was warm to the touch. Too warm, or worse. We brought something back with us. They moved quickly, retracing what they assumed were their earlier steps. But no trace of their landing craft remained, not even an indentation in the sand. The dune it had rested on was now a shallow basin filled with petrified roots. It's as if a forest had tried to grow and failed within seconds. The moment Lena reached for her radio, it crackled not with static, but with whispering, familiar yet layered, as though hundreds of versions of her voice were all speaking at once, saying different things, laughing, crying, warning. Then silence. She dropped it. That was ... me. They pressed forward, no longer to escape, but to understand. Whatever threshold they'd crossed had redefined the very concept of place. And then they found the city. It wasn't in ruins. It had never been buried. Kalshahar stood untouched, its towers rising like obsidian teeth from the sands. The architecture was impossible fluid lines rising into geometric peaks, each structure humming softly like a sleeping beast. The light here did not cast shadows. Instead, it seemed absorbed by the buildings, pulled inward, never to return. Basara's knees nearly gave out. This ... This is it. The city from the Sumerian star maps. But it's not ancient. It's waiting. As they stepped onto what might have been a street tour, something far older than streets, their presence activated something. Patterns lit beneath their feet. Each step triggered pulses of blue light that spread in hexagonal waves ahead of them. Symbols appeared in the air, floating like dust motes, then evaporating just before comprehension. Raleigh murmured, "This city is ... awake." No answer came. Just a rhythm, a pulse. Lena pointed toward a central tower taller than the others, smooth as glass, but reflecting nothing. That's where it wants us. As they approached, time began to fragment. Lena's vision doubled. One moment she walked beside Raleigh, then he was gone, replaced by a younger version of himself, wearing desert fatigues from a decade earlier. She blinked. Now he was older, scarred, one eye clouded. Basara called out, but his voice echoed in 3 tones, none of them his. His own words began to sound foreign, syllables rearranged. This city ... reshapes reality around memory, around possibility. They entered the tower. Inside, there were no floors, no stairs. Just a vast vertical chamber stretching infinitely both upward and down. Gravity shifted as soon as they stepped forward. The walls were inscribed with stories-moving images like living tapestries. One showed a civilization not yet born. Another, an apocalypse long past. A third depicted 3 figures identical to them standing where they now stood. But in this version, one of them fell. Another screamed. The third turned into light. Raleigh touched the image. It paused. You see it too? Lena whispered. He nodded. We're not the first. We're not even the original. Just then, the tower began to hum louder. A beam of pale light rose from the center of the chamber, swallowing the ceiling. From within it, a silhouette formed. Not a being, but a concept. Shape changed constantly, cycling through forms, genders, materials. It spoke not in words, but decisions. You have seen beyond. Now you must choose. Before them, 3 paths formed. To the left, a portal back to the desert as it was, but at a cost. One must stay. To the right, a glimpse of Earth thousands of years into the future. Safe, but no return. And forward, a place beyond time, where Kalshahar was one of many such cities. A knowledge so vast, it could consume them. They stood in silence. Raleigh looked to the others. Lena's face was calm. Basara trembled, yet nodded. They stepped forward. Have you ever felt that something ancient watches from the corner of our reality? This journey stirred something in you, a memory that never belonged to your lifetime. Share your thoughts below. Like this video if you're ready for more forgotten truths. And don't forget to subscribe, because our next descent into the unknown is closer than you think. Now, let me get this straight. You think that just because you've got a few extra chromosomes that you can waltz into my office and tell me how to run my business? You misunderstand my profession. Being a monster is a job, not a hobby. And a certain someone happens to be the best at it. Ah, Dr. Lecter, always a pleasure. Did you find the artifact? Not yet, but I will. You see, there's a problem with your plan. Well, actually, there are many, but we won't concern ourselves with that today. You see, when my partner and I left, we left a little present for you. Oh, really? And what would that be? Let's just say a little insurance. If you find yourself in a tight spot, you might want to call upon us. I do so hate surprises. I brought you something too, Dr. Memories. What? Oh, that's not very nice, don't you think? No. See, memories are funny things. They stick to people like smells or scenes. And some people carry a lot of those. That sounds delightful. What? You think I'm gonna drown in memories? Please, I'll dissect them, absorb their essence, find the flaw in their construction, then use them against their creators. Very well. Just don't expect me to help you when you inevitably fail. We wouldn't dream of asking you for help. After all, you're nothing but a relic of the past, soon to be nothing but dust on an archaeologist's brush. You misunderstand my purpose. I'm here to preserve history, make it tangible breathing. You misunderstand mine. I'm here to devour history, consume it, become it. You remind me of an exotic animal, beautiful, dangerous, ultimately inconsequential. Tell me, do you feel sorry for the beasts that died so that you could study their bones? Of course, I feel sorry for them. That's why I try to bring them back, give them a second life through understanding. Unlike you, I believe that the past deserves more than teeth and claws. But what if the past wants teeth and claws? What if it craves them, and it shall have them? Do you truly believe that this place holds all knowledge, that it will save you? This place hungers. It feeds on curiosity, offering morsels of insight, goading the mind to pry deeper. Do you think that you can resist it, Dr. Lecter? Oh, trust me, I'll resist it. I always do. But it's such a bother, isn't it? All this power at my fingertips, and I uneven use it properly because somebody has to spoil the fun. I'm afraid I don't follow. There's a reason why they called this place the Vault of Whispers. Knowledge is a dangerous thing, Dr. Lecter. A tease corrupts the mind, twists it, breaks it. Some secrets, some histories, they're best left buried. Here's a secret for you, Dr. Lecter. I don't fear knowledge. I embrace it. Bring it on, Dr. Lecter. Bring all the madness you think you can handle. The more tangled the web, the more glorious the feast. Well, you certainly are an enigma, Dr. Lecter. Perhaps I should bring more of my friends to meet you. I do love a good hunt. Then, by all means, Dr. Hunt, but beware. The archives don't release its prey easily. Oh, I'm not afraid of a little competition. In fact, I welcome it. Just remember, Dr. Lecter, the artifact's not in the archives. To find it, you must earn it. First, you must prove yourself worthy. And how do I do that? By playing your little game, Dr. Lecter. I am always eager to please. Very well. Then let the game begin. You didn't tell me it would be this hard to get a job. They stood before the Genesis Codex in silence. Time stretched not forward, not backward, but outward. They no longer felt hunger or fatigue, only a deep ache behind the eyes. As if every cell in their bodies now remembered things they had never known. The guardians stepped aside, fading into the walls like smoke, folding into shadows. They were alone. It was Becerra who finally broke the stillness. We came for answers, but maybe this place was always waiting for questions. Lena stared at the codex. What if we don't take it? What if just being here changed us? Raleigh turned toward the spiral they had descended. We may not be able to leave. Then, without warning, the chamber began to shift. Not tremble shift. The codex rose. The chamber around them dissolved into stars. One by one, the constellations realigned, forming maps, then blueprints, then faces. Giant faces, some human, others unrecognizable. Each one whispered a word. Remember. But the words were not spoken. They were felt in bone, in blood, in breath. Suddenly, they were no longer in the chamber. They stood in the heart of the desert again. Only... The desert was not theirs. The sun loomed larger in the sky, tinted with crimson. The dunes were darker. The ruins of Kalshahar were visible on the horizon, but no longer buried. Fully unearthed, alive. Watching behind them, no footprints marked their arrival. They turned on, the codex was there. Not the object, but the impression of it burned into their minds, imprinted on their senses. They had taken it within themselves. Then they noticed something else. Others were approaching. Figures, some in modern dress, others in ancient robes. Some in suits stitched from stars and metal. Travelers, seekers, carriers of forgotten truths, and each one nodded as they passed. Lena whispered, "We weren't the first," Raleigh added, "and we won't be the last." As the sky darkened, they realized the final truth. Kalshahar was not a city. It was a threshold, a convergence of memory and myth, calling across dimensions to those who dared to ask the questions no one else would, and those who answered, never truly returned. What if the greatest truths were never hidden but waiting for the right eyes to see them? If this story made you question reality, time, or your place in the universe, leave a comment below. Your interpretation might illuminate someone else's path. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us again because the desert still whispers. And Kalshahar is not done with us.